My mother didn't own much. A two-bedroom house in Clarksville, Tennessee, a 2009 Honda she'd driven since I was in high school, and a savings account she'd fed $20 at a time for 30 years. Nothing worth killing over, most people would say. Most people hadn't met my brother. She died on a Tuesday, which felt wrong. My mother was a Sunday kind of woman. Church shoes by the door. Coffee brewing before 6. Gospel music low on the kitchen radio. Tuesdays were for errands and phone calls and reminding me to eat more than coffee for breakfast. Tuesdays weren't supposed to end her. The hospital called me at work. Cardiac event, the nurse said, as if my mother's heart simply decided it had somewhere more important to be. 61 years old. No prior heart disease. No warning. I drove the 3 hours from Nashville in a blur I still can't fully account for. Running 2 red lights I didn't register until I was already past them. By the time I arrived, my brother Daniel was already there. He and his girlfriend, Cassie, sat in the waiting room, looking exactly the way you'd expect, grieving family to look red eyes, hunched shoulders, hands folded. The performance was convincing enough that I hugged him without thinking. I regretted it later. The funeral was small. My mother had outlived most of her friends, and the ones still standing were too frail to travel. Daniel handled the arrangements, which should have struck me as odd. He hadn't visited her in 8 months. Cassie chose the flowers, which should have struck me as stranger. She and my mother had barely spoken without friction since the two of them got together 4 years ago. I told myself, grief made people step up. I told myself a lot of things that week. It was at the graveside that Warren Hodge found me. I didn't know him by name. I'd seen him once, maybe twice, at holidays when my mother mentioned him as her attorney. A compact man, early 60s, with the kind of careful posture that belonged to someone used to being watched. He waited until the last prayer was finished, until the small crowd had thinned down to just the funeral director and a groundskeeper at a polite distance, and then he walked over with the specific purpose of a man who'd been rehearsing this moment. "You're Rachel," he said. "Not a question. I am." He glanced past me at Daniel and Cassie, who were accepting condolences from my mother's neighbor. Then he looked back, voice dropping beneath the wind. "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. Alone." He pressed a business card into my hand. "Don't mention this to your brother." I almost asked why, but something in the way he said it, not dramatic, not whispering, just precise, stopped me. People who want to create a scene say things dramatically. People who are actually worried say them quietly. 9 o'clock, he said, and walked away before Daniel could see who'd spoken to me. I slept in my mother's house that night. Daniel offered their hotel room, and I declined with an excuse about needing to sort through her things. The real reason was simpler. I needed to be somewhere that still smelled like her lavender dish soap and the cedar closet and the faint ghost of the vanilla candles she burned every Friday evening. I needed to sit in the kitchen she'd cooked 30 years of dinners in and feel her presence before something told me it was time to start questioning it. I sat at her table for a long time. The house was in a way houses get when their central person is gone. Not peaceful quiet, but waiting quiet. Like every room was holding its breath. I noticed the mail first. A stack of it on the counter, rubber banded together, which my mother never did. She opened mail the same day it arrived, a habit she called not letting things pile up. This stack was thick and rubber banded, which meant someone else had touched it. I didn't unwrap it. I photographed it with my phone and left it exactly where I found it. Then I noticed the cabinet above the refrigerator was open an inch. My mother kept that cabinet locked. I knew because I'd asked her about it once as a teenager, and she'd said, with a small, private smile, that some things were hers and hers alone. I never pressed it. I respected privacy because she'd raised me to. It was open now, and the small padlock that usually hung through the latch was sitting on top of the refrigerator like it had been set down in a hurry. I pushed the cabinet fully open with the back of my hand. Inside was a metal box, the kind you'd find at an office supply store, meant for document storage. It was there, but pushed to the back corner at an angle, like it had been rifled through and replaced without care. I took another photograph. Then I closed the cabinet and went to bed, because I understood then that tomorrow wasn't going to be simple and I needed to be sharp for it. Warren Hodge's office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown that looked like it hadn't been renovated since 1987, which somehow made it feel more trustworthy. He was already at his desk when his assistant brought me in, coffee in front of him, a manila folder closed on the table between us. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said don't bring my brother." "Most people don't say that unless there's a reason." He nodded, appreciating the directness. "Your mother updated her will 11 months ago. She came to me herself. She was very specific about 2 things. First, that you were to be sole executor and primary heir of her estate, the house, the savings account, and a life insurance policy she'd been paying into since 2002. I said nothing. I waited. Second, he continued, she told me that if anything happened to her before she could speak to you directly, I was to give you this." He opened the folder and pushed it toward me. On top was a sealed envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting. Below it were copies of the updated will, signed and notarized. She said she didn't want it kept at the house. She was worried it might disappear. I picked up the envelope carefully. "I want to be honest with you," Warren said. "Last week, your brother came to my office. He brought a copy of what he called her actual will. The one naming him executor and splitting the estate evenly. His version is dated 4 months ago." He paused. "It has her signature on it, but it's not the one she gave you." "No. And the one she gave me is the one that holds up legally. But I want you to know he's planning to contest it. He's already retained an attorney." He folded his hands on the desk. "There's something else. Your mother called me 3 weeks before she died. She was upset. She said she believed someone had been going through her things. She mentioned a locked cabinet. She said she'd found a drawer open that she was sure she'd closed. The kitchen cabinet. The male rubber banded wrong. Did she say who she thought it was?" Warren looked at me steadily. "She said she thought it was Daniel. She said he'd visited twice in the previous month, which he hadn't done in over a year. Both times with Cassie. Both times they insisted on helping around the house while she rested. Both times she felt worse afterward. The room felt different after he said that. Not smaller. Exactly. Just more serious." I opened my mother's envelope right there at his desk. Inside was a single index card in her neat, compressed handwriting. She'd always written small, as if she was aware of the space she was taking up. "Rachel, if you're reading this, it means I was right to worry. Check the box in the cabinet. Everything I found is in there. I love you more than you know. Don't let them get away with it." I drove back to the house with both hands white on the steering wheel. The metal box opened with a key I found in the one place my mother and I had always shared, the bottom of her jewelry dish, beneath the broken watch she never threw away because my father had given it to her. Inside the box were 4 things: a notebook, a folder of printed bank statements, a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a duplicate of the real will, and a small voice recorder, the kind she used to use for grocery lists before phones made that unnecessary. I sat on her bedroom floor and went through everything in order. The notebook first. My mother's handwriting across 40 pages, dates and observations going back 7 months. Daniel called again. Wants to check in on the finances. Told him I was fine. 2 days later, Cassie brought soup. Felt nauseated that night and the following morning. Thought it was the stress. 1 week after that, Daniel asked about the insurance policy again. Said he was just making sure everything was in order. Told him Warren handled all of that. He seemed frustrated when I said that. She kept going. Found the filing cabinet drawer open. I didn't leave it open. I keep important documents there. I should have noticed if I'd moved them. Noticed something missing from the folder marked policies. Called Warren. He has the real copy. I feel better knowing that. Then, 2 months before she died, Cassie brought dinner again last Sunday. Felt very sick by Monday. The same sick as before. Not a stomach bug sick. Different, like my whole system was slowing down. I'm going to the doctor on Thursday. I'm going to ask them to run a full panel. And then, 1 month before, doctor says my liver values are abnormal. He wants to repeat the blood work. I didn't tell him about my suspicions. I don't know how to say this out loud yet. I'm afraid of being wrong. I'm more afraid of being right. I set the notebook down and pressed both palms flat against the floor. The bank statements came next. My mother had a joint account with Daniel, a relic from years ago when she'd added him to help pay her bills after a surgery. She'd told me once she kept meaning to remove him, but never got around to the paperwork. Highlighted in yellow marker, her handwriting in the margins, transactions she didn't recognize. Small ones initially, $40, $90, then larger, $300, $500. All labeled as utilities or household expenses. All on days she'd told him in text messages she wasn't feeling well. I found the texts printed out behind the statements, each one time-stamped. She'd done all of this herself. My 61-year-old mother had built a file the way a paralegal would. Methodical, cross-referenced, dated. She'd been afraid, and she'd channeled it into documentation because she didn't know what else to do. The voice recorder was last. I pressed play, and her voice came through the small speaker, and I had to sit very still to keep from breaking down entirely. This is me, Margaret Cole, recording this on the 14th. I don't know if this will be useful to anyone, but I want to say it out loud at least once. I believe my son has been taking money from our joint account without my knowledge. I believe Cassie has been putting something in my food, because I get sick after I eat what she brings, and I don't get sick any other time. I don't have proof of the second thing yet. I have some proof of the first. I've given everything to Warren. Rachel, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was scared you wouldn't believe me. I was scared I was wrong. You're not the kind of person who lets things go unfinished. Please don't let this go unfinished. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Hey, you around today? Cassie and I want to come help sort through Mom's stuff. I turned the phone face down and kept it that way. The woman at the county sheriff's office listened to me for 4 minutes before transferring me to a detective. The detective listened for 12 minutes before asking me to come in with the box. I drove there directly, box on the passenger seat, recorder in my jacket pocket. I wasn't leaving any of it at the house. Detective Sandra Okafor was organized and unhurried, which I appreciated. She went through the notebook page by page, asked me to walk her through the bank statements, listened to the recording twice. When it finished the second time, she sat back in her chair and asked me one question before she asked anything else. When did the abnormal liver results come up? About 2 months before she died, I said. And did anyone besides her doctor know about them? I thought about it. She mentioned going to the doctor in her notebook. She didn't say who she told. Okafor wrote something down. We're going to request her full medical file. We're also going to request financial records on the joint account going back to the point when those transactions started. She looked at me steadily. I want you to understand that this process takes time, and I need you not to confront your brother or his girlfriend with any of this before we've had a chance to verify what you've brought me. I understand. Do you? She asked, not unkindly. Because in my experience, people understand that in this room and then do the exact opposite when their phone rings 20 minutes later. I work in healthcare administration, I said. I have sat in rooms where the wrong word at the wrong moment destroyed the entire outcome. I understand. She nodded. Good. Don't go home alone tonight. I stayed with a friend from work, a woman named Grace who asked no questions and made up the guest room without ceremony. I sat at her kitchen table until midnight, going through everything on my phone photographs I'd taken the night before. Screenshots of text message threads between my mother and Daniel over the previous year, notes I'd been typing into a document since Warren's office that morning. My mother had texted Daniel 47 times in the last 6 months. He'd responded to 19 of them. The ones he didn't respond to were the ones where she mentioned doctors, or Warren, or feeling better. The ones he answered quickly were the ones about finances, about the house, about whether she'd updated her paperwork recently. There was a thread from 4 months ago where she'd told him she was getting everything sorted with Warren, and he'd written back within 3 minutes. What do you mean sorted? What are you changing? She'd replied, just making sure things are the way I want them. He'd sent 4 more messages that she hadn't answered. Then a phone call she apparently didn't pick up. By the time I went to sleep, I had a document 17 pages long. Okafor called me 4 days later. She didn't lead with pleasantries. The medical examiner is reopening your mother's case. Her liver enzyme levels at the time of death were consistent with prolonged exposure to a hepatotoxic substance. Combined with the pattern of symptoms in her journal, we're treating this as a suspicious death investigation. I sat down on Grace's couch. What substance? We're still running tox screens. But the pattern matches chronic low-level poisoning, the kind that accumulates over weeks. It's not fast-acting. It's designed to look like the body failing on its own. Designed. That word sat in my chest like a stone. What about the financial records? $6,200 over 7 months. All pulled from the joint account in increments small enough not to trigger an automatic flag. A few of them were withdrawn in cash from an ATM 2 miles from Daniel's apartment. She paused. We've also spoken with Warren Hodge. The will your brother is trying to contest is a forgery. The notary stamp on his version is from a notary who retired 18 months ago and has confirmed she did not sign that document. He forged her signature. And the notary stamp, which upgrades this from a civil matter to a criminal one. Another pause. Rachel, I need you to be prepared for something. We're going to bring them in for questioning. When that happens, Daniel will likely try to contact you. Don't agree to meet him without telling me first. Daniel called me the evening after his interview with the detectives. I was sitting in my car in Grace's driveway, having just come from a second meeting with Warren, and I watched his name appear on my screen for 4 rings before I answered. They talked to us today. His voice was controlled in the particular way of someone working very hard at sounding calm. I heard a beat. You heard from who? Doesn't matter. Rachel. His tone shifted softer, more careful. The voice he used when he wanted something. I know this has been an insane week. I know we're both trying to process Mom dying and everything that comes after. I need you to understand that whatever they're telling you, whatever they showed you, there's context you're missing. What context? The money I was helping her. Okay? She asked me to manage some expenses, and I was doing that. She knew. We had an understanding. She wrote in her notebook that she found her filing cabinet open and didn't know how it got that way. Silence. She wrote that she'd been getting sick after eating food you brought over, I continued. She recorded herself saying it. Out loud. In her own voice. Rachel, she was sick. Her memory was, don't. The word came out flat and hard, and he stopped. She wasn't confused, I said. She was scared. And she spent the last 7 months of her life documenting everything she was scared of instead of calling me because she didn't want to be wrong. She was protecting you until she couldn't anymore. Daniel's voice changed then. The soft, careful tone disappeared and something colder replaced it. You need to be very careful about what you do next. Why? Because you're about to blow up everything. The house, the estate, the family, all of it. For what? Because she kept a notebook? For the truth, I said. That's what she asked me to do. He hung up. Okafor called 20 minutes later. That conversation was recorded, she told me. We had a warrant. His comment about being very careful about what you do next is going into the file. They were arrested 6 days later. I found out from Okafor before it happened so I wouldn't hear it somewhere else first, which I appreciated more than I told her. She called at 7 in the morning and said, simply, that the toxicology results had come back. Traces of a plant-based compound, toxic to the liver in sustained doses, had been found in tissue samples. It had been found, she told me quietly, in a supplement container recovered from Cassie's car during a voluntary search she'd apparently agreed to without thinking about what they'd find. The container's label had been removed. The compound was legal to purchase in certain forms. It had been bought online and shipped to an address 1 town over from their apartment, under a name that was not quite Cassie's but close enough to confirm who made the order. I drove to my mother's house after I hung up with Okafor. I let myself in with my key and sat at the kitchen table the same way I'd sat the first night, but different now. The house was still quiet, still holding its breath, but the waiting quality had changed. It felt less like dread and more like something about to be said. I opened my mother's notebook to the last entry. The handwriting was slightly less controlled than the early pages, a little unsteady, the pen pressed lighter, but the words were clear. I trust Rachel to finish this. She has always known how to walk into something hard and not look away. The trial was in March. I requested leave from work and my director approved it without question, which was one of the few uncomplicated things about that entire period. The courtroom was quieter than I expected, smaller than courtrooms look on television. The prosecutor was a methodical woman named Helen Park who had the demeanor of someone who found disorganized evidence personally offensive. She laid out the case the way my mother had laid out her notebook, chronological, precise, no emotional flourishes. She started with the joint account, $6,200, 62 distinct transactions, pattern consistent across 7 months. Then the forged will, the retired notary, the impossible signature. Then the text message history. Daniel's response rate dropping sharply every time my mother mentioned doctors or estate planning. Then the toxicology. Then the supplement container. Daniel's attorney tried the family finances or complicated defense for the money. He tried she was misremembering for the notebook. He tried alternative sources of exposure for the toxicology. Helen Park took apart each one with the specific patience of a person who had prepared for exactly these arguments. When the recording from my mother's voice recorder played in the courtroom, the jury went completely still. My mother's voice filled that room, careful, frightened, certain, and I watched 3 jurors' faces change in the same moment. Not dramatically. Just a small shift behind the eyes, the look of people who had just understood something they hadn't fully understood before. Cassie's attorney attempted to argue that she hadn't known what was in the supplement container, that she'd purchased it believing it was a natural liver support product, that she hadn't understood the dosage. The forensic chemist on the stand explained patiently that the compound in question did not appear in any commercially sold supplement, that it required specific knowledge to source, and that the quantity ordered was consistent with intentional sustained dosing, not accidental supplementation. The attorney sat down. I testified on the 4th day. I told the jury about Warren Hodge's office, about the business card pressed into my hand at the graveside, about the drive back to the house, about the cabinet open an inch above the refrigerator. I told them about the key in the bottom of the jewelry dish, about sitting on my mother's bedroom floor reading 40 pages of her fear in her own handwriting. I kept my voice level. My mother's voice recorder had already done the emotional work. My job was to provide the thread that connected everything she'd left behind. Daniel looked at me for most of my testimony. I looked at the jury. On the final day of testimony, the prosecutor read excerpts from my mother's notebook directly into the record. She read them the way someone reads something that matters, unhurried, letting each line land. When she reached the entry about getting sick after meals at their house, I heard someone behind me exhale. When she reached the last entry, the one about trusting me to finish it, I kept my eyes forward and my hands still in my lap. The jury deliberated for a day and a half. When the verdict came in, the forewoman read it with the particular flatness of someone who had sat with a difficult truth long enough to say it clearly. Guilty on the charge of murder in the 2nd degree. Guilty on 2 counts of financial fraud. Guilty on the charge of forgery. Cassie. Guilty on 1 count of conspiracy and 1 count of administering a toxic substance. Daniel sat with his jaw set and his eyes on the table. Cassie pressed both hands over her mouth. Neither of them made a sound. My mother's neighbor was in the back row. She'd driven 3 hours to be there, which I only found out afterward when she came and found me in the hallway and took both my hands and said, "She talked about you all the time. You know, she said you were the most stubborn person she'd ever loved." She was crying. I was not, but only because I had been saving it for somewhere private. Warren Hodge shook my hand outside the courthouse. He looked both satisfied and tired, the way people look when they've been carrying something for a long time and have finally been allowed to set it down. I drove back to Clarksville that evening. I parked in my mother's driveway and sat for a minute listening to the engine cool down. The porch light was on. I'd been leaving it on since the first night, some instinct toward keeping the house from looking abandoned. The neighborhood was quiet, the good quiet this time, the ordinary Tuesday evening quiet of people making dinner and dogs being walked, and nothing catastrophic happening to anyone. I let myself in and made coffee in her kitchen and sat at her table. The notebook was in my bag, where it had been since the detective returned it to me. I took it out and set it on the table in front of me, but I didn't open it. I'd read it enough times. I knew every word. My mother had been 61 years old, and she had been frightened, and she had taken that fear and made it into something precise and careful and completely impossible to ignore. She had known she might not be the one to finish it. She had made sure someone could. The coffee was the same brand she'd always bought. I'd picked it up from the same shelf at the same grocery store without thinking about it. Some things you carry forward without deciding to. I drank it slowly, both hands around the mug, and let the house breathe around me.